Do you warm up or cool down? What does this consist of? Do you have dynamic and mobility exercises? Or do you just jump on a cardio machine for 5 minutes? Do you have a cool down, or is it non-existent? Welcome to the health series. This is warming up and cooling down techniques.
Good afternoon. Ryan Veysey, PSP is Flymo, and in today's video we're going to be discussing the principles behind a general purpose warm-up. My hope at the end of this video is you picked up some tips, some tricks, or maybe even gain a new perspective that you can now apply directly to your own training. How I've broken this down is, and it's going to sound like a Jeopardy round, but it's not. We're going to start with the ball and socket joint, posterior chain, to and from the midline, and then we'll end it with some dynamic movements. We'll give some visual representations of some examples, maybe discuss what to look for from an evaluator's perspective, and just kind of generally tying warm-up together that flows in a proper way that you can now apply to most workouts. Obviously, there's going to be some nuance involved if you're getting a little bit more specialized, but we'll worry about that maybe in another video. So first up on the docket is the ball and socket joint. We only have two examples of this in the body, one in the shoulder and one in the hip. So for the shoulder, you have your humerus bone and you have your shoulder socket. It fits like this, pretty straightforward. But you have a synovial fluid sac, and this applies to the hip as well, with the femur and the hip joint. You have a synovial fluid sac that acts as cushion, and if the musculature allows it, it really gives you this incredible range of motion and variance in that range of motion. The most streamlined way for this purpose to warm up the rotator cuff are good old-fashioned arm circles. So how I like to do it is I go palms down, I start small, and then I gradually get larger. Pretty squared away, but if you're looking for a little bit more nuance in somebody's movement, what I like to do as well is after they do the forward motion, I get them to go palms up, and you're going the opposite direction. Same thing, starting small, and you gradually get larger. But you'll notice, because I have tighter pecs, that when I do this, in order to get my arms flat and up, I kind of have to cheat a little bit by extending my lower back. So if you do see that, somebody doing the arm circles and they are kind of cheating a little bit, that might be something you want to look for in regards to doing any kind of overhead pressing. Because if I have an overarch in my back, that means I don't have the range of motion to fully get my arms overhead in a anatomically correct position. You can get away with it, but you might have problems there down the line, or if you're really pushing weight, it might be problematic. So, what does that even mean? Well, it could lead to an impingement down the line in your shoulder. So if you're doing the arm circles and you find that you're kind of struggling to get into that position, maybe a little bit of shoulder pain up in the top here where your acromion joint is, a little quick assessment you can do is, let's say it's in your right shoulder, on this side, I'm looking at the camera, it's kind of mirrored. Take your right arm, put it across, and you'll just lift your elbow in front of your face. If you have no pain, great. Probably have no impingement, but again, nothing's guaranteed. But if you do have some pain, right in this top position here, then it could be an impingement. Might be something you want to keep an eye on and definitely get assessed at some point, because that could progress into something worse. Moving on to the hip joint. This is obviously imperative as it pertains to squatting, specifically squatting at any kind of depth with any kind of structural integrity, making sure your knees are tracking over the toes and all that good stuff. The example we're going to use for our warm-up are hip openers and closers, really utilizing the ball and socket joint we were talking about. So you want to keep your hips straight, and you're going to notice on myself, because I have tighter hips, I have a little bit of compensatory trunk rotation. So hips are forward, your legs are going to come out, and then into the midline. And you're walking while you're doing this. So up, and then after 10, 20 meters, you can switch to up, and then out. Out, in, and switch to inside out. A little bit harder to walk. Another example we're going to look at as it pertains to the hip joint is leg raises, and how that is a pretty good predictor of your overall squat depth, at least prior to being warmed up, but it gives you a general idea of where you're going to fit. So what does that look like? Take a leg and lift it as high as you can on your own. Okay, not bad. But that's actually pretty terrible, because theoretically, I should be able to bring my leg up to about chest height, because that's pretty much max depth for a squat. So what does this look like? Look familiar? It's because we're in this position, maybe not this bad, but you're in this position all day on a computer and you've trained your leg to max out and miss range of motion. So a simple way of firing those hip flexors up is assisted leg raises. So you're going to walk, you're going to lift up the leg as high as you can, you're going to take it, you're going to give it a little squeeze to the rib side, take another couple steps, lift the leg as high as you can, give it another squeeze, and you're going to repeat that for 10, 20 minutes. Moving on to the posterior chain for 400, we're going to talk mainly about the glutes and hamstrings, although that does include the erector spinae of your lower back and your calves. The most important thing for us to focus on for a general purpose warm-up is hinging at the hips. So, what does that look like? You're standing tall, and the first thing you're going to do is push your butt back while maintaining a nice flat back, and there's a slight bend in your knees. I know you can't see because the camera's cut off, but that'll tell you a lot. So, if you hinge at the hips and already you kind of feel a little bit of tightness in your hamstrings, you might want to focus on warming up the hamstrings a little bit more or incorporating more stretching into your overall routine. Because if we think about it, if we're already tight in this position, how are we going to get lower to grab a barbell or a kettlebell to perform a deadlift, or have a kettlebell for a goblet squat or a barbell for a back squat if we're already preemptively limited by our posterior chain? And that makes me want to reiterate the word chain. Don't be so sure that it's one specific part of this that's giving you problems. Hey man, anytime I'm trying to do deadlifts, I can already feel it in my hamstrings and it's limiting my ability to get into the hole, and I'm worried about injuring myself. So you're trying to mitigate that. So you're at home, you're stretching all the time, you're foam rolling all the time, you're doing all these things that are already overstimulating a potentially fully stretched muscle, when it could be you have tight calves that are pulling on your hammies, or you have weak glutes, so your hamstrings are trying to compensate. Just another thing to be cognizant of, I know that the word chain is built right into it, and it seems super obvious that everything's connected, but that can be an easy aspect to overlook. Moving on to arguably the most important part of the posterior chain, glutes. Most of the time these are underdeveloped in people because going back to that seated position, you're always at this and things are relaxed. What that can lead to, especially compounded with having those tight hip flexors, is you get a situation where your pelvis is actually tilted forward. It's called anterior pelvic tilt, which will then, because you have weak glutes, stretch your hamstrings. So you might actually have decent hamstring flexibility, but they're already redlined because of your weak glutes. One of the best examples we can use for strengthening our glutes are glute bridges, and that goes directly back to thinking about the purpose of a muscle. What are glutes for? Glutes are to ensure that if we flex our glutes, I'm standing now. They're to keep us upright because we're bipedal animals when we walk. So you can apply that logic to any muscle, but specifically with the glutes, we can now think about doing glute bridges, where you can lay down on the floor and then extend your hips up. You can use a barbell if you want to get crazy, or you can just do deadlifts, squats, but really be cognizant of flexing your glutes instead of using your back or your hammies to finish the rep. Think about contracting your glutes the entire time, and that's what's making you stand up. Your glutes are big muscles, they're made to handle that type of load. But in general, get in the habit of flexing your glutes, even if you're just standing here like this. You can think about other apes, other monkeys, you notice that they have no glutes. That's because most of the time they're walking on all fours, right? But we have big glutes because we're supposed to be standing upright. So when you're walking, when you're doing anything, just focus on contracting glutes, maybe not the whole time, but get in the habit of that mind-muscle connection. Up next, to and from the midline, don't get married to moving in a linear direction during the warm-up. Make sure you're incorporating some abduction, and some lateral movement. Basic warm-up we're going to look at for moving laterally are side shuffles or monster walk. There's multiple names for it. Basically, you're getting into a half squat. Both your feet are forward. You don't have a foot leading you in either direction. Both feet are forward, and half squat. Pushing yourself and reaching out with your lead leg and pulling yourself into that leg. Right? So, I mean, this is kind of useless because this is like 2 feet of room here, but for the sake of the video, just giving you a visual. And it's pretty straightforward. In our video, we've incorporated actually across 4 touches, like a tactile cue, to end that length, and then you go the other direction. Talking about the difference between adduction and abduction, pretty straightforward. Adduction is moving towards the midline. So you're out here, and this is any limb, so legs and arms towards the midline. Abduction is moving away from your body. So if you think about some funny guys you see on newscasts, you know, talking about aliens, I got abducted. Think about it like that. Adduction in, abduction away. And we actually have a warm-up incorporated in the dynamic movement section that kind of touches on both of these things that you'll see later. And finally, we're going to end it with dynamic movements or dynamic warm-ups. These are multi-joint movements that you're going to utilize when you're really starting to turn up your warm-up. You're kind of getting hot, the blood's flowing, instead of just standing there and doing, you know, single leg curls all day. You're going to incorporate something like we have, for example, is a jog with some butt kicks, or a jog with some high knees. Tying back into the posterior chain, we have a movement called shoe shiners or floor sweeps. There's a bunch of different names that you can see in the later video, and that's incorporating glutes, hammies, and you're also moving while you're doing it. So that's a bit of a dynamic warm-up. Going back to the abduction part, we have star jumps. So what that looks like is you're standing in a pencil position, you're going to jump in the air and quickly spread out your arms and your legs while you're in the air, and then quickly snap them back into your midline before you hit the ground. Now the reason that's dynamic is because it's hitting your abductors in an explosive way, your calves, quads, there's a little bit of a balance component there, and you're going to see an example of that later in the video. Switching gears a little bit now, my colleague Danielle Yole is going to physically act out a warm-up sequence for you. We're going to utilize some of these principles, and we're encouraging you to take it, add or subtract from it, and also provide some further examples going forward.
Okay, let's do the warm-up, making sure that you are doing all the movements at a normal pace because this video is sped up. I am doing it for about 6 minutes, so let's get warm.
that's explaining a general purpose warm-up that you can use, and she'll be the one acting it out. So let's get started. So the first one is arm circles. You'll start with palms down, and you will start small, gradually get larger. If you have about 20 meters of space to play with, that's fine. After you go 20 meters one way, you go 20 meters the other, palms up, same thing, going the opposite direction, small, getting larger. So after you've had a chance to warm up the rotator cuffs a bit, we're going to quickly go to lower body. First, some knee lifts. That just involves you bringing up your knees high as you can on your own. Then you're going to give it a little bit of a squeeze, get that extra little stretch. Take another couple steps, do the other leg. Again, 10 to 20 meters. Go for it. Next, we're going to be moving to hips for some hip openers and closers. For this one, you're going to want to keep your hips as straight as possible so you're not swinging your hips to get some momentum. Hips forward, and we're going to be opening our legs and closing our legs. And in that 10 to 15 to 20 foot marker, depending on how much space you have, whatever the halfway point is, you'll switch to inside out. It's a little bit harder to walk, but Danielle will show us how that looks. Moving on to more posterior chain, we'll do shoe shiners or whatever you call them. I've heard like 7 different names for these. It involves lifting your toe, you're going to hinge at the hips while keeping that leg straight, and you're doing a little bit of a sweeping motion. Again, Danielle's going to show us how that looks. Okay, great. So just make sure you're keeping those toes elevated to ensure that you are getting a stretch in your glutes and your hamstrings, because that will feed directly into the next one. Side shuffle, monster walk, there's a few different names for it. Ultimately, you're going to be in a quarter squat or half squat, ideally a half squat, and you're going to be moving in a side motion, making sure that both of your feet are forward and you're not leading yourself with a foot, because that's a little bit of cheating. Just making sure that both feet are forward, and Danielle will show us how that looks. So you saw at the end there, Danielle do a bit of a half lunge into a cross floor touch. That's just a tactile cue to end that length, depending on how far you're going. Again, 20 meters would be better. So moving on to something that's going to elevate the heart rate a little bit more, a 65% effort jog, 40 meters total. Let's take a look. So now we're going to spice up the jog a little bit. 40 meters total, one direction, you're going to be doing butt kicks, and then 20 meters back, you're going to be doing high knees. So hopefully you enjoyed Danielle looking like a cartoon character leaving a bank robbery scene. Next, we're going to be doing a side shuffle, similar to the last one.
I like that.
One more time here. So hopefully you enjoyed seeing Danielle run away like a cartoon character leaving a bank robbery. Moving on now, we're going to be doing a side shuffle, similar to the last one, except without the floor touch, but this time for speed, so you're making sure that back leg is really propelling yourself in the direction that you're going. Moving on now to something a little more full body, inchworms. We're going to do 3 of them. Feet a little bit narrow, don't have to be touching, but narrow. Hinge at the hips, touch your toes, walk your hands out. You're going to do a single push-up and then walk your feet into your hands. Stand up, rinse and repeat 2 more times. turning up the heat a bit, 80% effort jog for 20 meters. Next up, we're going to be doing 25 jumping jacks, and not that variety, long, methodical, full extension at the top. Here we go. Next up, going back to lower body weight squats. So your feet can be about shoulder width apart, your flares can be, try that again. Okay, next up, we're going back to lower body for some air squats. Your feet can be shoulder width apart and your toes can be flared a little bit. You're gonna hinge at the hips, make sure your knees are pushing out and tracking over your toes so you're not doing anything wonky with your legs, and we're gonna do 5 of those. Next up, star jumps. We're gonna do 10, and that involves jumping in the air and making a star position with your limbs, and then you're quickly snapping your limbs back into the midline before you touch the ground. All right, next up, moving to tempo push-ups. It'll be 4 seconds on the way down and then 1 on the way up. So it'll look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Quick explosion up. Let's see Danielle pump them out. So it did look like Danielle could do more than that. If you can do 2, do 2. If you can do 5, do 5. If you can do more than that, you don't have to because we're just warming up. Segueing into the final portion of the warm-up is a combination of an inchworm and a world's greatest stretch. So it'll start exactly like a regular inchworm. You go down, you get into the top of a push-up position, you're swinging a leg to the outside, opening up that same side arm, looking at the ceiling, extending your back leg. So you're kind of in a tripod position, arm back down, switch legs, other side, walk your feet into your hands, stand up, do 3 of those, and we'll see Danielle act it out because it does sound a little bit convoluted without a demo. That concludes the general purpose warm-up. Stay tuned now for the cool down that you will do after your workout.
Hopefully you enjoyed your workout. With that warm-up, it must have made a good one. So time for your cool down techniques. These are really important. We're gonna focus on our full body. However, if you are doing a workout specifically working one muscle group, you wanna hit that as well and focus a little bit more and hold it a bit more. Okay, let's do it. Starting with a wide straddle hamstring sweep where your legs are wide and you're gonna be going in one direction and then the other. Maybe do 2 circles and then switching directions. Let's go. Time to get deep into our hamstrings with a side body stretch as well. So you're gonna take your right leg and cross it behind your left. You're gonna bend both of your knees and press your back knee into your front knee and then inviting that side body stretch with your top arm. Let's do it. For this next stretch, you will need a wall. So we're getting deep into those shoulders, starting with one hand, chest forward, and then hinging forward to get deep into your shoulder. Let's go. Okay, let's take it to the ground. Ryan is going to demonstrate our next 3 movements. We're going to start in a cross-legged position, and then we're going to be hinging forward and holding down for 20 seconds, and then switching feet, and then hinging forward, and then flipping our palms up and bringing our hands overhead, tucking our ribs in, and breathing, bringing those shoulders down, and finishing with a butterfly pose. So when we're doing the butterfly pose, if your knees are up super high, it's a possibility your hips are super tight. So take it as it comes, deep breaths, and relax into the position. Let's go. Okay, coming onto our backs. Our 3 next moves, we're going to start with bringing our right knee into our chest, giving it some love and a hug. From there, you're more than welcome to point and flex your foot, whatever feels good, and then going into a figure 4 stretch. When you're in this figure 4 stretch, please flex your top foot that's crossing over your left. It will protect your knee and keep it happy. And then we're going to be dropping our left leg and coming into a spinal twist. This will be a great way to release any tension in that lower back. We do some funky stuff when we're tired, so this will make it feel nice and great. Thanks. Okay, Ryan's going to take it from here with some basic stretching. Let's go. Well guys, thanks for tuning in to today's series for health and fitness, warm up and cool down techniques. My name's Danielle Yole.
I'm Ryan Veysey.
Have an amazing rest of your day. Air high five.